Welcome back, everybody. I am the Executioner, and today we are interviewing Dr. Walter Block. He is the author of Defending the Undefendable. He's known a lot for libertarianism. He wrote Undefending the Undefendable 2 and a whole host of work. And I'd like to start by saying, what got you interested in libertarianism?
Well, to start me off in my political career, I was a buddy of Bernie Sanders. He and I went to high school together. We were on the track team together. I had roughly the same views as he had. I'm Jewish. I'm from Brooklyn. Everyone was a pinko, sort of. And, I wasn't thinking about it, and I just gravitated toward that. Then Ayn Rand came to Brooklyn College, where I was a student, and I tried to convert her to socialism. And they had this lunch in her honor, the Ayn Rand Studies Club, or whatever they were called. And they had this lunch, and I came to it, and there must have been 100 people, 50 on a side on a long table, and she was sitting at the head of the table with her buddies, Alan Greenspan and Nathaniel Brandon and Leonard Peikoff. And the only empty seats were at the other end of the table. And I turned to my neighbor and I said, socialism is the way to go. Capitalism is evil. And he said, well, I don't really know all that much about it, but the people who do are at the other end of the table. So I stuck my head between Ayn's and Nathan's. And I said, there's a socialist here who wants to debate someone on socialism and capitalism. I must have been 20, maybe Brandon was 35, Rand 50. I'm not sure the exact age, but I was a kid. Brandon was very nice. He said, look, there's no room at the this end of the table, but I'll come to the other end of the table and I'll talk to you under two conditions. One is we don't allow this to lapse until we settle it and we keep going. And the other is you read two books that I'll recommend. One was Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. The other was Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. And I read the books. I couldn't put down Ayn Rand's book the whole weekend. It was 1,200 pages and I just couldn't put it down. I read it and I went to his house and Rand's house a few times and I was converted. And now I was a free enterpriser. And later on, I met Murray Rothbard, who was my main mentor, guru, and he converted me to anarcho-capitalism. The first conversion, Ayn Rand, must have been around 1962. And then I met Murray maybe in 1965 or 1966. And then my views were pretty much the same as they were after I met Murray. Maybe a little later, I got converted to Austrian economics, maybe 68, 69. And that's how I got to where I am now, politically speaking.
Economics in One Lesson, I procrastinated on reading it for a very long time because the way Henry Hazlitt wrote it, to me, it sounds more better as like a lecture. So I threw on the audiobook and I just got through it and it's a wonderful work.
Well, you mentioned my book, Defending 1, 2, and also 3. I'm now working on version 4. And it was sort of my homage to that book. What Henry Hazlitt did was he had one lesson, Economics in One Lesson. Don't look at things right now, but look in the future. Don't look at just this little bit of the economy, but look at the whole thing. And then 35 examples. Well, I did the same thing for libertarianism. Libertarianism is non-aggression principle and private property rights, and 35 examples of how that all works out. So I revere Henry Hazlitt, Economics in One Lesson. Whenever I'm trying to convert people to the one true faith, those would be the two books that I would recommend, the two books that convinced me of economic freedom.
The one thing I like about Economics in One Lesson is that he kind of goes over kind of two things. He looks kind of like the neoclassical and he looks at the new economics, and he basically kind of said, well, the problem with neoclassicals were they tended to look just at the long term versus new economics where it was just the short term. And I liked how he kind of bridged it because I read a lot of Soul, and Soul kind of, he emphasized long term, but I kind of went into like a funk of kind of just looking at long term. But when I kind of read that kind of like the Economics in One Lesson, I kind of forgot about the whole point here. But Defending the Undefendable, I liked it because a lot of it, the examples, prostitution, drug dealing, stuff like that, it's such a kind of like unorthodox way of thinking about it because conventionally people look at that and they go, oh my God, how terrible. But a lot of them perform the same functions that in the normal economy in relation to drug dealers. Well, basically, I would summarize them more as unlicensed pharmacists Marxists versus trying to always exploit people. I know that's a loaded word, but people picture drug dealers like trying to get people hooked and whatever, but you really don't get returned clientele if they end up dead.
Yeah, no, I agree with you entirely. I'm a big fan of Thomas Sowell, who you just mentioned. I have to tell you my Thomas Sowell story. I edited a book, and I asked him to contribute to it on affirmative action. And he talked about the Bakke case, Bakke. And when he sent me the article, he said, "Look, if you change one word, I'm pulling the article out of your compilation." He probably had a lot of unhappy experiences with editors who changed what he was saying. He didn't realize I was a big fan of his and I would never do that. But I got him because I read the thing and I must have found 5 typos. And I said, "Hey, look, I got to change these typos. I got to fix these typos. Is that okay?" And he said, "Sure." So that's my Thomas Sowell story. And now I have to tell you my Bernie Sanders story. Bernie Sanders doesn't run away from much. He didn't run away from socialism. Even before socialism was not as popular as it is now, unfortunately, to a great degree because of his efforts. And he doesn't run away from not only ex-convicts voting, but convicts voting. People in jail should vote. But there's one person that he runs away from, and that's me. Why? Because we both were on the track team, and we did the same events, the mile and cross country, 2.5 miles. And he was one of the best runners in the city, and I was a mediocre runner. His time for the mile was, I don't know, 4:40. Mine, I never broke 5, but I got close. So we'd start off at the same point on the start of the race, and then he would run away from me because he was faster than me. And that's
why he did run away from you.
He ran away from me.
That's pretty hilarious because I supported Sanders a number of years ago, and when I was in high school, I sort of fell into the trap of thinking, wouldn't it be great to improve things via the state? And then I think it was a friend of mine, he mentioned the Libertarian Party of all things, and I'm like, Libertarian Party, like what's that? And I had heard through a bunch of commentators like Kyle Kalinske and a bunch of those progressives, they would mention Rothbard here and there and libertarianism, and they would just sort of straw man it, and that was my opinion about it for a while. Then I'm like, well, I might as well just read into it, and eventually I started to agree with it more and more because around 2016, people were starting to get that whole political correctness phase, and I was like, well, I believe in free speech. I don't think people should be silencing each other through force or coercion or whatever. And I just sort of drifted more into libertarianism. And a lot of the things that I read first, well, not read, I listened to Ayn Rand a lot and I go, well, this makes more sense. And then I got into objectivism and all of that. But then I sort of had questions like, well, if everything is objective, what about some things that didn't really seem like they're kind of questions behind it? Like I think it was objective value. I'm like, that doesn't really make sense because I think it was one of the examples I thought of, and I think Adam Smith wrote about it, was the whole, well, if I'm out in the desert and somebody has water and I have diamonds, then like I would be crazy to like not give up the diamonds. And actually, when I was reading Hazlitt, he brought up the whole Feynman paradox thing and how it was kind of like Aristotle. I think it was one of the arguments. I can't remember about it, but he ended up writing about that. But
the diamond water paradox is a very important part of economics. I think the people who get credit for solving that one was Jevons, Walras, and Menger, the Austrian economist. And the paradox is that a cup full of diamonds is worth a lot more than a cup full of water. And yet, if we didn't have any water, we'd all die in a day or two. Whereas if we didn't have any diamonds, life would go on pretty much as it is. So how do you account for it? And this was the marginalist revolution, the idea that we never choose between all water and all diamonds. If we did, water would be more valuable. We only choose marginally. A little bit of diamonds is worth a lot more than a little bit of water because we've got so much water compared to our needs for it and so few diamonds compared to our needs for it. So now I'm a big fan of Ayn Rand's objectivist school on economics. She's pretty good on economics, free enterprise. She loves Ludwig von Mises, and you can't go too far wrong if you like Ludwig von Mises. But the rest of it, epistemology, aesthetics, and I don't don't know. I'm not really a big fan of her on that. And also, she's a little cultish. If you don't agree with her on everything, she kicks you out of the movement.
Well, I did read I think it was an account by Rothbard, I think, about relationship with Rand and how they sort of fizzle on it.
Yeah. No, Murray
Yep.
was a fan of Rand for a while, and then they had a parting of the ways.
And the thing I kind of, when I read more about different philosophers and stuff like that, more late 1800s, like Max Stirner, individualism and stuff like that, I sort of came to like this realization that Rand kind of repackaged a lot of ideas, whether unintentionally or not. A lot of those ideas were around for, and sometimes when I talk to objectivists, sometimes they kind of sort of think, well, a lot of this is original, and it's like, well, it's not. I don't want to say, like, I was reading earlier of New Economics, and I don't really want to quit it to Keynes repackaging old ideas, but it's sort of, there's similarity to it.
Well, every scholar stands on the shoulders of every other scholar. We all depend upon the people who came before us, and we add, just a little bit of our own. But Ayn Rand, I think you're right, unduly try to take credit for originality of stuff that came long before her. So she was a little unique in that way, which is also problematic. Whereas Murray was happy to give credit to people who came before him. And hopefully all good scholars will do that.
Yeah, that's something I've kind of thought about, is that trying to act like ideas that we come up with are solely original. It's kind of like, well, no, there's a grain of originality, but if you don't look back to the previous people who came up with the same ideas and kind of credit that a bit, that it sort of builds an ego, and it get too big for views, and you start kind of acting like, well, I came up with it, I'm the originator, and it's like, well, no, not at all. I think it was with general theory. Keynes, he would have been familiar with a couple of the works. I think it was a Swedish economist, or it was something Hazlitt was talking about in regards to interest. And he sort of was like, well, you would have known about that economist, yet you only put in a small footnote about it. And then I think it was a couple chapters later, he points out, well, you just cited more of them here. So about how's that work?
No, I think you're right. Although if you put in at least a small footnote, that's more kosher than if you don't. Whereas Ayn Rand wouldn't be putting in a small footnote to anyone, whereas at least Keynes put in a small footnote, so we have to give him credit for that.
What would you say inspired you to get into economics as a field?
Well, I was, when I graduated from Brooklyn College in around 1964, I was really unsure. I knew I wanted to promote liberty. Liberty was sort of got me. I was hooked. I'm an addict of liberty. And I was unsure as to which was the best vehicle to promote liberty. Was it economics or philosophy? So what I did is I started taking courses. I entered a master's program at CCNY in philosophy. No, the other way around, in economics, and in Brooklyn College in philosophy. And each semester I'd take 2 of this and 3 of that, or 3 of this and 2 of that. And finally, I decided that it was economics was a better vehicle to promote liberty than philosophy. And then I got into Columbia University, and my dissertation advisor there was Gary Becker. And I don't think I ever regretted it. I am philosophically oriented. I mean, Austrian economics is sort of a philosophical economic school. So I am not a mathematical oriented economist or statistical or econometric. I'm more of a philosophically oriented economist. And I think I made the right decision. One, because economics gets closer to the core of liberty, because there are a lot of economic failures, or what do they call it? Market failures. And the way to combat that is through economics, not philosophy. And secondly, economics departments in universities are much more open to free enterprise. They're not as open as I'd like, but they're way more open to it than philosophy. Philosophy professors and philosophy departments are very socialistic. I've been to several philosophy meetings at Loyola University and next door Tulane, and even on the most basic elemental aspects of economics, they're just out to lunch. They think the minimum wage is a great idea to help raise wages. They think rent control is a good idea to keep rents down. They're against free trade, and these are very sophisticated philosophy people. It's very rare that philosophers are good on economics. Now, there are exceptions, like Robert Nozick, a brilliant philosopher and very, very good on economics. So there are exceptions, but in general, I think economics is a much better vehicle to promote liberty than is philosophy.
Well, the thing about economics I kind of like is that, and it kind of goes to Mises a bit, is that it sort of gets at like how people act in certain ways. You can't be sure how they're going to act because you can't really account for how millions of people are going to do their own individual things, whether, okay, this person's going to go to McDonald's, this person's going to go to Burger King and all that. And I like it because it's just sort of a way of trying to understand, well, why do people in a sense make different choices when, if you think about it, like I've heard like one example, the whole Sanders would bring this up. He would go, why are there so many deodorants out there? And it's like, well, I don't want to smell like you do, and you don't want to smell like what I do. So the whole idea of, well, we should just have one this, and it just doesn't work that way. Nobody would want, I don't know, it's the same thing with alcohol. Same thing with cars. Nobody wants the exact same thing. People have different tastes. People have different preferences. And the whole thing is that manufacturers and entrepreneurs, they're going to cater to those things. And it's more of, I would say, a more ideal way of doing things versus trying to have some committee do it or someone who's a dictator or whatever. It's better to do that than trying to account for every single variable, and you couldn't. You would have to have 800 people, and those 800 people would have to be on the same wavelength. Just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and also they commit a little bit of a contradiction, a logical contradiction. On the one hand, Bernie Sanders doesn't want that many deodorant brands. He doesn't want that many breakfast cereals. He doesn't want that many brands of car. And so he wants to reduce it. But if he reduces the number, then the concentration ratio goes higher. Namely, each company now accounts for a higher proportion of the industry. Well, now we bring in antitrust. In other words, if you have fewer, then the concentration rates go up higher, and the antitrust people start getting on your case. So he's really contradicting himself. The whole thing is intellectually dead from the neck up.
On one hand, he's anti-monopoly, but on the other hand, wouldn't it be great to have one product that everybody can agree to? And also at the same time, wouldn't it be great if we had one, we can't call it a firm because we don't like firms, but one agency that can make everything for it? It just seems like gymnastics to get around the whole thing. It just, to me, that sort of perplexes me how people on one hand can be like, as I just mentioned, it's running around instead of just saying, well, there are people who want this, people who want that, allow certain people to cater to those things. And yes, there might be mistakes, market failures, but it won't have the problems of trying to concentrate resources to one area.
The way they do it in East Germany and North Korea and the Soviet Union, there'd be one firm, and it would be a government firm. But I do want to make a point that in economics, the phrase market failure is a, how shall I say it, a specialized phrase. It's monopoly and public goods and externalities and things like that. And the Austro-libertarian view is that there are no market failures of that sort, because what that means is a market failure means that the government can do it better by regulating or taking over. Yes, there are bankruptcies, there are errors, because the free enterprise system is comprised of human beings, and human beings are the mistake-making animals. We're always making errors. So there are errors, but there are no market failures, I think would be the more accurate way of putting it.
Yeah, sometimes I don't know. I use that more as like, I don't know, I use that more as like an offhand term, not necessarily like literally, but I use it more to describe like mistakes and stuff like that. But yeah, it is a specialized term. But one thing I never really got about the Sanders, for example, and many of the kind of left-leaning people out there, like I think his name is Richard Wolff and Robert, is that on one hand, they don't like rich people, but on the other hand, when I looked up some of I want to understand, like, well, if they say they're for the working class, all that, and they make the argument, well, CEOs don't work as much as their employees to get, what is it, like, I think it's like the average salary is about 120,000, but they don't work that hard, therefore they shouldn't get it. But you look up like the salaries and what they charge for their speaking gigs and stuff like that, and not necessarily, well, yeah, I'm a capitalist, I think they should be able to make money, but it's a bit contradictory on one hand to say, well, we don't like capitalism, we don't like the overaccumulation of wealth in some hands. Meanwhile, you're charging $10,000 a speaking gig and getting $100,000 as salary from a particular university. That kind of seems like there's a disconnect with that.
Well, I wouldn't call it a disconnect. I call it hypocrisy, and I'm sure you would agree with me that on the one hand, that they talk wealth is evil, and on the other hand, they're pretty wealthy. So there's a little bit of hypocrisy going on in there.
Well, when I hear phrases, and this irritated me because I work, and they always go, people like us, the working class. It's like, oh, the working class, you're making like in one gig more than any average worker makes in about a month. Like, how it is hypocrisy at the end of the day. But that's just one of the things that it just really kind of grinds my gears, is that it's just one of, I don't know, but another example I would say is Tom Hartman, for example. I used to listen to him and I used to agree with him, but then I looked into him and I'm like, wait a minute, this guy is a businessman, has done a lot in business. And then I read the book, The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, and it's supposedly going over how Mises, Hayek, and all of them are connected to the trickle-down economics and how it's all gone downhill. And one thing I was reading in this absolutely grinds my gears is when he cherry picks. He was trying to say that Mises came up with a critical race theory of like Austrian economics, and how I think it was capitalism is the best way to further like social progress because it takes the inefficient races and puts them to work the efficient races or whatever. But he took from Human Action a snippet paragraph where he's describing how the Mises was writing about how if the East is to industrialize, like China, for example, on the level of the West, it should try to adopt the policies of the West in regards to property and production and social and analysis he was basing from. And it just irritates me sometimes how a lot of these thinkers, they tend to just grab snippets from here and there to try to construct their theory.
Well, you're right about the cherry picking, but I don't think that capitalism is good for one race and not good for another race. I mean, Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams, or Jason Riley, are black scholars, and they are a very, very free enterprise. They are sometimes called Oreo cookies because, according to people like Joe Biden, if you're black, you have to be a socialist. And if you're not a socialist and you're black, somehow you're not really authentically black. You're an Oreo cookie. You're black on the outside. You have black skin, but on the inside, you're white. And this is just preposterous. It's just utterly ridiculous to think that somehow socialism works better for black people and capitalism works better for white people. It's just economic drivel.
Yeah, I've noticed that in regards to Soul, every criticism I've seen on social media or in the reviews on certain books of theirs, they just tend to say, well, he's quote unquote traitor for some reason. And it's like, well, isn't that racist to try to say that, well, if you are black African American, you must agree with us, otherwise you are not not African American. It really depends with people like that, is that they see race on one hand, and then they'll be like, well, we're for African Americans, we're for social justice. And then the minute that somebody who has a more libertarian or conservative opinion, like Walter Williams or Thomas Sowell, it immediately is, well, you're automatically a traitor and you must not be this.
No, you're absolutely right. And this is really a disgrace because Walter Williams and Thomas Sowell and Gary Becker, who is white, are my three gurus on the economics of race. And they've demonstrated over and over again that the market certainly does not hurt Black people. Rather, the market helps Black people, and the market helps everyone. And the idea that somehow you need affirmative action and you need welfare to help Black people or poor people is almost the exact opposite of the case. Namely, welfare creates dependency. Welfare breaks up the family, not just the Black family, but in Sweden, they've had welfare and they broke up the white family in Sweden. And you have all sorts of incidences of breakdown when the father is not a part of the family. You have higher crime rates and lower education attainments and lower wealth. And these three people have been very instrumental, along with Charles Murray, in showing that welfare paradoxically hurts the recipients because it lowers incentives and breaks up the family, and the family is crucially important for economic development.